Well, good morning, everyone. How are you? Good morning. So we're going to go ahead and get started with the presentation here. Go through some introductions real quick. And this is the flow of how our presentation is going to go this morning. It's an hour. There's a lot of information coming at you in an hour. This is more of a lessons learned, especially for those of you that are in smaller, mid-sized agencies, of what an agency goes through when you have an encounter like what you're going to see today. But I'm going to start out real quick. My name is Dan Brown. I'm the police chief in Winslow, Arizona. Standing on the corner for the Eagles, folks. I will play that for you in a minute because we can't do this without that, without playing the Eagles song, right? It's a little bit about me. I've been in law enforcement about 20 years. I've only been in Winslow just right at a year and a half now. So I came following the incident that we're going to be discussing today. But I've got some panel members here that was here during and shortly after. And it's more of, this presentation is more meant for where were we at the start, prior to this incident occurring, the incident itself, and then the lessons learned after that, and what has been done since. Steve Pocken is a city manager with us today. It's always good to have your boss here, especially when he retires in 90 days, because he kind of lets his hair down and you can drink at night. Lieutenant Ernie Cano sitting here. And next to me here, he was actually a sergeant at the time. He was actually the sergeant on scene of this incident when it occurred. And Chris Vasquez, at the end of the table, he is the police chief in Eloy, Arizona, and actually he's a former sheriff of Pinal County and was the interim director of police services for about 9 months, contracted in between the retirement of the former police chief and me coming on board. So we'll hear from all of us here today. And again, I appreciate you being here. So Winslow, Arizona. Show of hands, who's been to Winslow? All right, great. And after today, if nothing else, you'll probably increase our tourism because you're like, hey, when I go see the Grand Canyon, it's only a couple hours away. Let me go out there. But we have the famous standing on the corner, which is their La Posada Hotel. A meteor crater is right down the road from us, so we get a lot of tourism. La Posada Hotel, which is a Fred Harvey hotel from the 1920s off the old railroads. So the American Southwest is alive and well. We also have the 9/11 Remembrance Garden, which is actually the largest artifact from 9/11 in the United States. Is actually in Winslow, Arizona, outside of New York. So who would have thought that? But it's a great remembrance to have. All right. So as promised, yes, you got the Eagles song. Now we can move on. So here's Winslow demographics to give you an idea of Winslow and what we have in our city. We have just under 10,000 residents. Our residents actually swell to about 20. We're right on the Interstate 40, about 40 minutes to the east of Flagstaff, Arizona. If you've ever been there, it's a very popular tourist route. We're right on the old Route 66. We get somewhere in the area of about 250, 300,000 visitors a year just to go stand on the corner. It's crazy, but there's always, day or night, there's always somebody out there taking photographs. So tourism, we have some major industries there as well. And if you look at some of the things we have, some of our major employers in Winslow are railroad, we have hospital workers, we have a prison, a state prison there. Who doesn't want a prison there, right? But that is kind of the makeup where we're at. It was established in the early 1800s, the late 1800s, and here's our police department. It's the average police department in Arizona and most across the country are smaller, like what we see here. And we have 24 sworn officers, chief down, and we have our own dispatch center, and we take animal control and all that. So that's the makeup where we're at. Believe it or not, in 2 counties. If you look at Arizona in the northeastern section, between both of those counties, this is the largest police department, the second largest police department in 2 counties. So we are very rural. Our nearest neighbors besides Flagstaff is Holbrook, and that's about 35 miles away. So we do host a sheriff's substation that has 1 or 2 deputies from the area in there. We back them up quite a bit. We also have a liquor officer in our area. Some of the history in our department is quite interesting as far as what we're responsible for. It's not a lot of land mass. We do, besides tourists, we also have a waterway that comes down there. But if you look at our calls for service and the calls for service that we have, this was just the first full 9 months of our year, starting in January of this year until September, the end of September. We had taken quite a few calls for service. You break that down, over 24 sworn, and of course not everybody's healthy, right? So if you can imagine, we're a very, very busy place. We're a border town for the Navajo Nation. And because of that, Navajo Nation does not have legalized alcohol on the Navajo Nation, and also the Hopi tribe is also there, so we get a lot of folks that come in town just to buy alcohol. While most cities across the country are facing heroin and opium addiction crisis, we have that, but ours by and large is still alcohol. So most of the issues that we deal with in our town as a border town for the Navajo Nation and some tribal is certainly due to alcohol. So that's kind of the breakdown of how busy we are. Our history of our agency, we went back before Arizona was a state in 1912. There was law enforcement off the old trading post routes in Winslow. So there would be a lot of traders that would come through. The old stagecoach lines would come through. They had camel lines that would come through, and of course the railroad. And been around. We had 1 line of duty death in Winslow, and of course that was in the early 1900s when it was still a town marshal. Since then, we've been very fortunate not to lose an officer in the line of duty. So we're going to focus on the turning point in Winslow, which is in March of 2016. Prior to March of 2016, as long as Winslow's been an agency, there hasn't been a lot of turnover in police chiefs. In fact, the police chief prior to me, prior to the interim, and he was actually already in drop. He was scheduled to retire. A really good guy, had been the police chief there since November of 2000, so he was a long-serving police chief in Winslow. They're not used to experience a lot of turnover there. So he was in drop, had that retirement dream going. The department was, like most, just understaffed up to that point. They had a couple of people in the academy. There were some openings. Who doesn't experience that in these smaller agencies? We don't pay like what you get paid down in the Phoenix region, where folks make pretty good money. In fact, a lot what you experience in the rural areas of the state is somebody get their certification, be there 2 or 3 years, and they'll go down to the Phoenix area and make a lot more money. So turnover in the rural communities, probably a lot like what some of you face in this room, it does turn over. So that was prior to March 16. And March 27th, if you're looking at that, that's actually Easter Sunday. Here's the chain of events as you see it. And basically, there was a call at a local convenience store. It was a Circle K, and there had been several calls of a woman that had gone in and shoplifted. There was only a couple of officers on the road. There was one, the county jail. The county jail's about 35 miles away. That's where we have to book people. So at any given time, there's almost always an officer going to and from the jail. So at this particular time, you had a sergeant on, and you also had an officer on the road, and they were dealing with other calls, and of course the shoplifting came in, shoplifting call. And as this incident unfolded, this was probably, I think, the third call, and Lieutenant Connell will talk a little bit more about the actual incident of it. But to preface what occurred with this, when the officer gets on scene, he's off to the side. Sergeant Connell was inside making contact. He hears, hey, something's going on outside. He runs out there, and by this time, a shooting had occurred with the officer and a Native American female that was just right around the corner from the Circle K, having left the Circle K. The Native American female had displayed a pair of scissors, and you're going to see that video right now. It is extremely graphic, so if you are opposed to seeing extreme violence or anything like that, turn away now. This is a fair warning. This is a taser axon video, so as the event comes, look very closely what the woman has in her hands after she goes to the ground and comes back up. One thing that we are not going to do today is talk a lot about what went right, what went wrong, as opposed to the actual shooting itself, because like many of these, there's lawsuits that come afterwards, and that's what the city of Winslow is facing right now. What we are primarily focusing on is what the pulse of the department prior to, during the event, immediately following the event, and then what has been done since to help heal the community and the agency. Here's the video. The officer had just turned on the taser cam when he was getting out, and those of you know there's no sound in the first 30 seconds.
Notified 7-0. Yeah.
That's the video. I didn't go and show you a lot more of that. If you saw what she had in her hands with a small pair of scissors, there were witnesses to this event. At this point, I'm going to turn the microphone over to Lieutenant Connell, who was then the sergeant on scene.
That video actually wasn't released right away, and if you want to talk about a viral video, when that thing finally did come out, it was everywhere. I had people that went through the academy with, people I hadn't seen for years, suddenly looking me up and calling me, and a lot of them, they just couldn't believe that I could move that fast. But in all seriousness, to check on me and see how things were. Not a lot of people were aware that I was directly involved in the incident, that I was right there. They just thought I had worked. Really, at the time of the event, I'd been a sergeant for about 4 years, and just like many departments, we'd been plagued with staffing issues, running it shorthanded, operating on a lot of overtime. That has a big impact on the morale of the department as well. We're a small department. Equipment issues, old vehicles, things that probably a lot of you in the audience are aware of and maybe experiencing. At the time, I was actually covering his shift for another sergeant because he had family in town for Easter. Officer working with me, working a little extra hours, came in early. We had one unit on the way to the jail, transporting a prisoner, as Chief Brown talked about. So there were just two of us working on a typical Sunday. That's not really that bad. You know, we would love to be staffed a little better, but we can manage. You don't wake up in the morning thinking, well, I think that maybe something's going to happen today. There's going to be a shooting today. So we're just running the best we can. Training-wise, our department was meeting the post standards, and you know, we weren't really doing a heck of a lot other. You know, we weren't really doing a lot of extra trainings. It's kind of also impacted morale. You know, some of that training, because the officers are always hungry for trainings, and I think we might have been better situated to handle this thing. Myself, the only training I've had for dealing with the after shooting incident was when I went through firearm instructor school. You know, I was a firearm instructor. They had a little block of instruction about, you know, officer-involved shooting. That kind of helped me a little bit, but as you see on the video, I don't know, it took me a minute after this happened just to digest what had happened, and my brain to catch up and start reacting to it. We had a lot of people coming out of their houses right away, and almost immediately, there's a man, it's not on the video, you can't see it, but there's a guy coming down the street, really hostile, about to come into the scene, and I don't know what he would have done, but I had to go over and address him and take care of that. And at this point, as far as like the resources and management of the crime scene, it was pretty much just me. The officer that was involved that pulled the trigger wasn't really able to help me out very much. You know, it's a very stressful thing, and he wasn't really able to engage. The only thing I could do was call the dispatch and get some units in, try to get everybody in as quick as I could, and that takes a little bit of time. First one on scene was Chief Garnett, and then we started trying to put up crime scene tape and manage it a little bit better. And then at some point people trickled in, and we kind of took a little bit better control over it. It's very frustrating and very helpless feeling, you know, to be alone. I was very lonely feeling to be the first guy there and not able to do a lot with so much chaos and people coming out of their houses. That was really tough to deal with. I like to think that I was ready for things. This isn't the first time we've had a shooting in Winslow. In 2010, we were involved in a situation. We actually had a SWAT team, and I was a part of that response and had a little bit of involvement there. You know, you start thinking I'm ready for this kind of stuff, and it just, that day, it just caught me off guard, I guess, and I wasn't ready as I thought I could be. You know, these are the areas where we improve, though, and where the department's improving. The result of this with the public, we had immediate public outrage. You know, there were protests involved after this. We had a lot going on. It was a lot more than one person could manage on scene, but in the days following, with everybody engaged, the public protests and public outcry were very negative. There was a lot of negative social media going on, and there were just a lot of things that the department wasn't actively engaging the public in dialogue about this event. And I think the city manager could probably speak to a little bit more about some of the reasons why that didn't immediately happen. Some of the lessons learned on this thing, I learned a lot that day and in the years to follow that. Really the importance of bringing up the training for supervisors to manage this type of event. Officer-involved shooting is a very big thing, and the planning and just that training having in place is something that's going to help. Calling in the critical incident stress management to help with the after effects for the staff, dispatchers, people involved. We didn't call anybody in right away for that. What we ended up doing, I've had a little bit of training in that from when I worked for Yuma Police Department. So what we did is kind of made a group of our own just to kind of address some of that stress and strain that it puts on you. Involving everyone in the incident, we'd get together and meet at the PD and just kind of sit and talk and go through the CISM type of thing. It wasn't an official one, but we did as best as we could to try to help it manage that. So one of the lessons we've learned, and we've actually brought them in now, and we do it regularly, is to bring that team in as soon as possible, or as soon as practicable, to help the officers and any staff that are involved in a stressful type of incident. Communication with staff, there's a lot of questions, and you're not talking about everything to the staff. They're wondering what's going on, what's next, what are we going to do? So just having that as a lesson learned is important too, to communicate with each other and have the staff and the chief giving some information and direction a little better than what we saw after the aftermath of this incident. And the public. That's another thing, engaging with the public, engaging with the media, and that's something that we've learned a big lesson about, and we're also doing differently and improving. And throughout this presentation, the other speakers will kind of open up a little bit more on that and see how that's been working for us. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Steve Pauck, and I'm the city manager in Winslow. I came to work in Winslow in 2014, so at the end of this year, and on my last day of work, I will have worked in the city of Winslow exactly 5 years and 1 day. I have 35 years of experience in local government, starting out in my hometown of Maumee, Ohio, where I was an elected official. I was a council member and I was the mayor in that community for 16 years, and then I realized that you could do similar work and actually make a living doing it, so I started putting out resumes. I wound up in Colorado for 7 years, and then my last 2 jobs have been here, and then just prior to that, 8 years in the city of Bisbee, Arizona. So no stranger to small towns. Largest town I ever managed was 15,000 people, and so small town was in my blood. Rural was my legacy. Because I started out in the metropolitan area and ended up 50 miles from the nearest town with a population of more than 15,000. So it comes with its own brand of issues, and any city manager, all of your city managers who worked in more than one place will tell you that each town has its own unique set of circumstances. While we have a lot of similarities, we also are very unique in many ways, and Winslow is no different. So when I arrived there in January of 2014, my initial assessment of the city was that there were a lot of problems, the least of which was the police department. Okay, the police department appeared to be running along. It appeared to be stable. It had an aging chief who probably was in a 20 or so year rut, but the rut was running down the tracks in the road. In the meantime, I had huge problems. We barely had a fire department at all, because just prior to my coming there, they were still coming out of the recession, and they had basically robbed the fire department to fund the rest of the general fund. And we were not even, we were lucky to even save foundations. So that was a huge task that was before us. As you probably noticed in the video, we don't hide the warts. We have some very pretty areas in the community, and we still have a lot of blight in the community. It's so typical of a Route 66 community that got bypassed by I-40. So we've been, I think in the almost 5 years I've been there, we've torn down 40 blighted buildings and started replacing them with new structures, bringing new events to the community, bringing some new life to the downtown, which has in turn brought some new businesses downtown that brings even more people. We don't want people to get their picture at the corner and then leave. We want them to stick around for a little while. And so slowly but surely we're finding ways to get that done. Public Works had their own brand of issues, so and I didn't know how much money I had. Okay, I truly didn't know. We had to hire a new finance director to find that out. So 2 years in to my tenure, I finally knew how much money was in the general fund. So I'm telling you this only because when you're being pulled 100 different ways, sometimes you overlook some really obvious things, and I'm no different than anybody else. I got focused on the things that really, really needed to be done, and actually never drilled down deep enough into the police department to find out that there were some serious morale issues and other issues. Now, the leadership in the police department, like Dan said, Chief was in the drop and he was coasting down. He told me when I first met him on my first day of work that this guy over here was going to be the next chief. And I said, well, you don't get to make that decision. Because the charter says that it's made by the city manager with the advice and consent of the city council. So they had already had some preconceived notions that needed to be kind of broken. And so that's what we did. In the meantime, we did know there's always been a little bit of tension between the city and our Native American neighbors to the north. We have the Hopi and the Navajo nations that are both within a very, very short distance of our community. And as Dan said, it was our community is a trade center for many of them. So when people came down to drink because the reservation was dry, sometimes we had to deal with those issues, and sometimes they weren't pleasant. And sometimes the Navajo Human Rights Commission would come down and meet with us to complain about certain stories that they heard from their folks, and we had to deal with those as well. At the same time, we were providing services to Navajo people that the nation wasn't aware of, keeping them alive, keeping them clothed, keeping them, making sure they didn't dehydrate in the summer and they didn't freeze to death in the winter. All of those things were part of our existence as a community that may be a little bit different than those of you who don't live near a reservation area or in the American Southwest. So we had all that going on. And so anyway, I wasn't, well, let's see, I'd just been there a little bit over 2 years on Easter Sunday of 2016. And I'd been down in the southern part of the state with my wife visiting some friends over that weekend. And I'll never forget it because we were driving home. We were going up Highway 87. We were in a little burg called Clint's Well. And the phone starts ringing in my car. And I thought it was Peggy's phone. I said, hey, phone's for you. And she said, no, the phone is for you. Well, it was, and I picked up the phone, and it was Steve Garnett, the former chief. And that day got worse and worse and worse as the time went on. Ernie has done an excellent job of describing to you because he was right there for the incident itself, so I won't go into that very much. But suffice to say, I was still an hour out of town, and by the time I got up to town, we didn't even go home, went directly to the police station, got a briefing, and started looking at what we were going to do. Now, one of the things that I want to bring out that I think is so important is we had contacted Arizona DPS, the Department of Public Safety, immediately, and we turned the investigation over to them. They came up, they were up there very quickly. They secured the scene, made sure that everything was okay, even though the events were a little bit chaotic because of the event just brought about a lot of anger in people in town, whether they were native or not, and these guys had to deal with it. We felt that we could not do the investigation. We handed it over to DPS. What I did not know, because I'd never done this before in 35 years in local government, was that Arizona DPS is not very, very fast. Okay? And I say that with all due respect because they have an enormous task as well. But the reality is that happened on March 27th, and the results of the investigation were not released to us until July 1st. Okay? We probably could have been more proactive. We could have been better equipped to get even no information out to our community faster than we did. And because we didn't do it as fast as we should have done, I think that just raised the level of angst in the community rather than help calm it down. And we've discovered since that getting out there, even if the information is minimal, can make a huge difference when you have an incident such as this, particularly in a small community. I had already made a decision when Steve retired. His retirement date was in August, Steve Garnett. We were going to kind of reshape the way the police department looked, because before I wanted to put another chief in place and let him put the ruts in the road, I wanted to make sure that the ruts that were in the road were removed and that we were able to do some things differently and more progressively than we had been. Toward that end, the incident itself actually precipitated that action several months before we had been planning to do it. And so Steve remained with us for a couple of months after the event occurred, before he retired. And then what I wanted to do was I wanted to commission an organization called the Police Executive Research Forum. Maybe some of you know about it, maybe some of you are members. They're out of Washington, D.C., and they come in and they take a critical look at your department, and they tell you things that they can see that you can't see, and they tell you to do things you don't want to do. And that's exactly what I thought we needed. And while we were doing that, I didn't want to bring a new chief in because I didn't want that, that interplay going on. So we have a service in Arizona, and maybe you do in some of your states too, that hires interim management people. And so I contacted the guy who runs the interim management service, and I said, do you have any police chiefs available? And he sent me a couple of people that we interviewed, and that's where Chris ended up coming in. And he can tell you more about his interim service, but I love this guy, okay? He was exactly what we needed at that critical point in our history. He was able to come in, he was able to calm the troops, he was able to talk with them, he was able to make their morale go back up at least a little bit. And like I say, I don't want to steal his thunder, but he was the best decision I made in 5 years as city manager in Winslow. Those two actions I felt were critical in our history of our police department, because the perf report is still being used today. We're still going through that. We're still taking the recommendations, whether we like them or not, and we're still implementing them. And so, and from the feedback that we're getting from our community, both within and without of our community, has been virtually all positive. Everybody's going to have their detractors. I mean, we're a police agency. It's going to happen. We know that. But it's a hell of a lot better than it was 2.5 years ago. So we've been, and one of the things I want to say about Chris that impressed me, because I had noticed no aspect of community policing going on in the city of Winslow in the first 2 years I was there. And without prompting, during our interview, he said the magic words. He talked to me about his commitment to community policing, and he implemented community policing activities the moment that he arrived on a scene. So, and that stood us well over the test of time. Dan can tell you more about that. So, we feel that community support is a ton better than it was 2 years ago. We understand that we still have a very, very long way to go. Perfection's impossible, but excellence is something that we think we can achieve. And we're going through the accreditation process right now, which I think is another step in getting to that point. And I always ask this question because I think it's one of the keystones to this whole thing being resolved the way it was legally, hinged on this. And I just want to ask for a quick show of hands. How many of your agencies employ body cameras? Congratulations. I asked that question last year at a city managers conference where I was presenting, and about 10% of the hands went up. Now, that was just Arizona, that particular. Now, you guys, of course, are from all over the world. That body cam video that Dan forced you to watch, and I have just watched for the last time in my life, that was the keystone piece of evidence in clearing that officer. Now, sometimes that keystone evidence will condemn your officers, okay? But if that's true, if that's the way it's supposed to be, then that's what it is. So much chaos surrounds these events. And in the last session that was in here, there was a guy here from St. Louis County. He was in the what was the town in? Yeah, thank you. of course, we didn't see that level of violence, that level of rioting, but we had to. If you have to hang your hat on anything, that body cam is really going to make a difference for you. So congratulations for you, those that do. For those who didn't raise their hands, I know it's expensive, but we had body cams when body cams weren't cool, and so we still got them. We believe in them. We live by them. And we believe that that's best for our community and for our officers. So anyway, I thank you for coming and listening to us, because I know that many of you, some of you have experienced this kind of shooting. Many of you have not. I got to tell you, I don't recommend it. And this, quite frankly, was part of where my decision to retire started. So anyway, carry on. God bless you all, because you all need it, and hopefully we will have helped you in some way, and we'll be happy to help you whenever we can. Chris.
I tell you, I've been in law enforcement almost 40 years, and coming into Winslow has probably been one of the most challenging jobs that I've ever had to face and ever had to do. Not that it's a bad town or a bad community or really a bad department. It would just needed fixing, and it was very challenging and very stressful for me to come in and deal with the things I had to. I was coming into a city and into a department where I knew absolutely no one. Wasn't familiar with the makeup. I had never been to Winslow in my life. Heard of it, but never been there. And so it was very challenging for me to come in. And initially when I was asked to go be the interim police chief there, I said, sure, and nothing was really told to me until I started on my first day, and I sat down with Steve, and he started telling me all these things, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what am I getting into? And then I started developing a game plan of what I needed to do to fix this department. And one of the first things I really did is I started doing, I did face-to-face, one-on-one interviews with every single employee in that department. And then after that, to learn what they felt, what they were feeling, and what was the makeup, what was the processes, how were things going, how did they feel before the shooting, during, and after the shooting. I also met with not the entire town, a lot of people, but I also met with key members of the community to get how did the community, to get their relationship, how the community felt about their police department. And what I found as far as internally was a group of men, the patrol officers, who's really the backbone of the department. Those guys that are out there every day putting the pedal to the metal, and where the rubber meets the road, that's the lifeblood of the department. They are going to make it or break it. And the morale was very bad. It was very low. And they kept telling me, the main thing they kept telling me was Chief, we want to be led. We want leaders out of our sergeants. We want leaders out of our lieutenants, and a leader out of our chief. We want someone to come out there that's not willing to roll up their sleeve, that is willing to roll up their sleeve and work with us. Go to calls with us. Do a tour shift with us. We know they got administrative things to do, but come out there and be with us instead of being in their office and never coming out or never talking to us or communicating with us. They wanted to be led. They wanted someone to come out and say, okay, guys, here's our mission. These are the goals. This is the problem. This is what we're facing. This is what we have to do to achieve and to accomplish to make this a safe community. They had no clue. They thought they would just go out there, get in the cars, ride around, and they didn't have a sense of a mission to carry out for the department. And they just wanted, like I said, leadership. And so one of the things I started doing is I had what I call with the sergeants and the lieutenants, basically I had a come to Jesus meeting with the leadership. And I asked them, I said, what legacy, when you leave here, what legacy do you want to leave behind? Do you want to leave a legacy behind that you were a leader, that you led from a front, and that you you work with your men and you accomplish all these great things, or are you going to be known as the leader that sat in his office all day long, was never heard from? A bad legacy. And I said, that stops today. Today you are going to be leaders of men and women. And you're going to go out there and you're going to lead from a front. And you're going to go out there and work with your staff to accomplish the goals. And then we set out a set of goals and objectives for what we needed to do to move this department forward. And I was very surprised that they responded and they started stepping up. And all of a sudden the officers started, and the civilian staff started coming to me and said, man, what'd you do to these guys? Well, you lit a fire under them. And they started now seeing true leaders in their department. And what I found in talking to the community was a community that really didn't have a trust in the department, because calls would go unanswered, or they would take a burglary report, they had suspects, and nothing was never done with it. In fact, I found almost 200 reports that were never written. They could have had follow-up done. And so we started putting in a measure of accountability, and the department says, we never hear from your police department unless they come to, we call and they come and handle a call. And they were, both sides were really afraid because of this shooting, because we had a lot of radicals actually from that side of the state coming in and protesting. They were calling them murderers, and they were calling them killers, and they're saying that they were racist against Native Americans, and this had a profound effect on them. And they wanted someone that would stand up and say, and lead them, and stand in front of them, and to lead them to overcome these issues. So gradually the morale started improving, and I took a quick look at their policies. And at that time, they had some policies that had never been changed in years. And we're just now starting to go with a company called Lexipol to establish good policy procedures. Kind of wordy, but they were good policies, and so we implemented those. And one of the problems they had with their policies is they didn't consistently enforce the policies. It all depended on who was the fair-haired child or who was on the outs. There's a lot of favoritism. There's a lot of favoritism in promotional, in the discipline. They didn't follow progressive discipline. There were some guys that had been disciplined for the same thing 3 or 4 times and got the same discipline, a letter of reprimand, and that was it. So there was really no bite behind their discipline process there. So we started putting processes in place and holding people accountable. And we put a discipline matrix in place that showed progressive discipline. That if you, after this time, if you do it again, this is going to be the next discipline that's going to be meted out up to termination. And I did terminate a couple of employees one while I was there, because he just wasn't performing up to standards, or a couple actually. The staffing there, as they've talked about, was rather low. We averaged maybe 1 or 2 guys so we had to do some creative scheduling to have a safe working environment for the officers, to have enough officers on the road to work to handle the needs. And then we started working really hard on being transparent, and also working very, very hard on communicating with the public. And we did something just as simple as coffee with a cop, to go out and open up a dialogue with the community. And once we opened up dialogue with the community and putting out press releases when we would do things good, and we started talking with them, then the community started gaining some trust within the police department. And just in closing, I like to say that I helped hire a chief, the existing chief. I wanted a type A personality that could think outside the box, that would come in, not afraid to make decisions, that would be a mover and shaker, and would hold his people accountable and give them a good mission and vision and values to accomplish the goal of law enforcement in Winslow. And then I stayed on for a week and worked with him, showing him the problem areas, showing the things that we had accomplished, so that he wouldn't be coming in blind like I did. He came in knowing what to expect and looked at the foundation that was set for him. So.
Thank you, Chris. I'm sorry, I have a hard time sitting down, but the moving and the shaker part, I promise I've lost a little weight recently, so when my feet hit the ground. Good panel. I'm gonna try to speed this up a little bit. So here I come into an atmosphere of change. Change has already started, and here's what I want to focus on for the rest of this is where are we at right now? Well, some of my personal perspectives on this was I was stepping into a law enforcement role that most police chiefs would not want to do. I had been a police chief for 3 years in an adjacent town about an hour and a half away. I was familiar with what was going on in Winslow. I grew up in the state of Arizona. I knew a lot of the staff members. I had trained them in academy settings and throughout the state. So I knew they had some good officers. I also knew that they had some morale issues that were being worked on. I had known Chris. Chris and I had gone to lunch a few times. I had a background in actually helping build police departments. I started my career in the city of Mesa, which is right outside of the Phoenix metropolitan area in a large area, and had worked tribal. I was a commander and an acting chief at the Gila River Indian community for about a year and a half. I was there, and I helped start Maricopa PD from inception and one of their original ones. So I knew that rebuilding process and some of the things that was taking place. And I had experience working with tribal governments. So I kind of took the attitude of, if not me, then who? And it wasn't really lucrative to step into pretty much a mess, if you will. But I think that the foundation had been set in where we were at. But I found that of all of this, the biggest thing that we were going to deal with was the media. And you can imagine the media outcry from the onset. And I will be honest with you here, one of the biggest things that I saw is if you are 2 hours behind a story breaking in your agencies, you're 2 hours too late, right? And what they did not do is proactively engage the media. And this was this old school thinking, hey, let's work with the county attorney, we'll get something out there. And of course, what county attorney ever wants anything released right away? But you have to release something. Hey, this was a tragic day in our city. You know, there was a loss of life. We don't have a lot of details right now, but when we get that, we will release that. That was not done. And so the public was able to create their own narrative. And when they take their narrative and they run with it, they're going to dig for anything they can unless you give the public something, unless you give the media something. And I think a lot of you have probably gone to media courses or what have you, and you're continuing to do that, and that's a focal point in a lot of this training. So here's just excerpts that are still online, and this is still going on today. They blow holes in everything you can. They're going to look at the officer. And this officer, I can tell you that if you have a field training program and you don't trust the process, if you don't trust the field training officers to do their job because they're going to make a recommendation, you ignore that recommendation, you are failing your own system. Don't do that. And those were some of the things that they were experiencing in Winslow, the policies, the procedures, and what have you. So going down through, these are just some of the media clippings that you had. That was Officer Shipley, the officer that was involved. He was cleared of any wrongdoing criminally. He was cleared of anything internally. He did not violate a use of force policy. However, it shed a lot of light on use of force and de-escalation tactics and the need to do more of that in the agency and to continually train. And if you look at any community, if you will, what is your press going to focus on? And the Navajo Nation is a huge, huge nation. They cover 4 states. And so they had a huge presence in our city. Right outside of our city right now, there's a billboard up, still to this day. We see something on this shooting every single day, pretty much. There's something out there, and there's comments made to the officers frequently. The spotlight was put on. I had Phoenix News Times come. One thing I said is I'm not going to back down from media. If you want to talk to me, come and talk to me, and they did. And Winslow became, of sorts, a ground zero for Native American shootings in the spotlight. And the statistics do show that Native Americans are more likely to die at the hands of police than any other culture in America. What they don't tell you on that is a lot of that is actually tribal police not Bordertown police doing that, okay? So sometimes the statistics, you know, they skew that one way or the other. This was the first time that the city of Winslow had shot a Native American suspect in over 50 years. But if you listen to it, it was, hey, this is going on. It's continually going on. And this is a pattern of practice. So much so that they asked the DOJ to step in. The DOJ said that there is not a standards of practice in the city of Winslow. So shortly after, this was Sergeant Hayes. He went out there, and this was before I got there again. I've only been out there about a year and a half. Sergeant Hayes, who actually just retired a couple of months ago, there was one positive news media story I got shortly after when he was out there actually working the neighborhoods. And what you saw there was somebody laying on the ground that was drunk and passed out. We had a nightmare. We had people come down that were passed out all over the streets, what have you. And so I started looking at some of the challenges that we faced within as the agency. And I had a lieutenant that had retired before I got there, so I had an opening there. Do you bring someone in from the outside? What do you do? I had the average span of 5 years of experience on the road, if not less, in the agency, because people would come and then they would leave. And then I had these folks that were close to retirement. And so what do you do when you're in a situation like that? I brought in some old salts, right? People that had retired. I brought in some sergeants that had retired, that had been sergeants in larger agencies. A retired police chief is one of my sergeants, right? And so we bring these folks in that understand liability, that understand how really law enforcement works, and to be a mentor and to maturate the folks that are coming up through the ranks and show them how law enforcement is done outside of Winslow. And some of the actions that we taken, I mean, I was having to show them things like a POP project. I looked at one call for service. We would go out and we would have somebody stabbed in the back, you know, from somebody else, and they were intoxicated. They would have a citation in their pocket where they had got an open container violation or something earlier in the day, and at that time they were slightly intoxicated. 5 hours later, now they're the victim of a crime, or they're a suspect of a crime. And so I said, you know, let's open up a POP project. What's that? Problem-oriented policing. You heard of it, you know, the Sarah model. What's that, right? So we taught them that, right? And as an old community action team officer, it's like, what do you want to do? How do we do this? How do we fix a problem? You got to scan the problem, right? For those of you that understand the Sarah model, it's been around a long time. Use it, look at it, right? And so we implemented that. We looked at our highest volume calls for service, and we started fixing a problem. We had city ordinances enacted. Right? Chris laid a great foundation for me, so I kind of knew what was going on, but at the same time, I had a great team, right? And I also had a lot of experience in coming in and doing this. And so PERF was a good blueprint. I had a 79-page blueprint that I could use, right? And there are still some things the PERF didn't miss, that they missed, right? Because they're in there for a short period of time doing an audit, but I think they hit most of the key elements on track. So, you know, here, I've got a blueprint. Let's follow this thing.
Law enforcement agencies across the country who have truly significant problems in their communities, I think if you dig deep, you'll find out they didn't bother to establish a relationship with those communities. And a lack of doing that will spell nothing but problems for you when something bad happens.
115474, Unit 239. I wasn't working when it happened. I got called in after it happened. All I did was secure the scene, and I can tell you this, it's a really, really sad situation for L'Oreal and her family. Like right after that, we'd get a lot of people yell profanities at us while we're on our traffic stops, you know, when they were passing by, and it happens with any officer involved shooting, you know. It's not, I'd have to be lying if I said, you know, it was Disneyland right after it.
For a law enforcement agency, we're fairly diverse. I mean, we, you know, probably better than the average, especially in the state of Arizona. Nationwide, I would think that we do very well. Here in Winslow, about 4.5 months, and it's going well. I mean, Winslow has a diverse population, but it also has had, you know, its share of, you know, recent high-profile incidents. One that happened, you know, last year. Winslow police officer had shot a Native American woman. That creates a lot of controversy, especially when you look at the statistics that show that Native Americans are more likely to die at the hands of police than any other culture in America.
When the shooting happened, it kind of blew up. There was protests. I know a lot of Native people, Hispanic people, Black people, and come to find out that a lot of them, they were having a lot of distrust. You know, there's just a lot of hurt still in the Native community here. We got a new chief of police now. He's a great guy. The stuff he's doing, I think, is what we've needed for a long time.
Continue to recruit qualified people of all genders, of all races and cultures and background. The biggest barriers that we have right now is lack of interest overall in law enforcement in America. Bad press kills our profession. And my greatest fear is, where are we going to be 20 years from now? So you ask yourself, look, we come and do a lot of training, and I know this is an hour, and some of us, we're passionate about this, and so we want to talk a lot about this experience. You have to ask yourself, is it working? We're trying to be more transparent. We started what was called the Citizen Liaison Committee, right? I know prior to it was a Civilian Oversight Committee. This is not a Civilian Oversight Committee. These are interest groups within the community. The NAACP, your Navajo Nation Human Rights Commission. And I reached out to those folks and said, hey, would you like to be part of a committee so we could sit and we could talk about some of the issues that are plaguing Winslow, that are plaguing our region, that are plaguing our nation? And we did that. And every time that there was something that occurred, we would put it out on social media. Case in point, March 2016 was the second officer-involved shooting since 2010 that the city of Winslow had. We had two shootings this year alone. And the first one was a nightmare call for me because we shot a Native American male outside the same Circle K that had an edged weapon. Sounded very familiar, eerily similar, right? He had committed an armed robbery. He charged the officer when he came out. We had the entire thing, lasted 49 seconds from the time that the clerk called 911 until the shots were fired. The officer was there almost immediately. It was one of my Native American officers who was actually the shooter in this case, right? But that wasn't told to the media. We didn't tell them any of that, but we told them that something had happened, and we weren't, that transparency used to not be there. But whenever you go out and you do coffee with a cop, you do barbecue with a cop, you do all these things, you're putting into the bank of public trust, if you will. And you're always making a deposit, and at some point you have to pull out of that deposit when things like this happen, because it's not if, it's when they're going to happen. And then we had another shooting. We shot another Native American male in a pawn shop. Again, two of my Native American officers. Did we say who it was? No. My guys go in to do a burglary alarm and get met with gunfire almost immediately, and they return fire. Neither one of those suspects died in that case. But we engaged the media proactively. So there's a lot that you can do. When you come in, you have to look at where the agency was at the start, where the agency is at when the problem's going on, and be honest with yourself and say, hey, what can I do better? Reach out to mentors that you have throughout the profession, not just your state, your region, locally, nationally. And, be very open, engage the public, go to those community meetings. That pays off later on. And I think what you saw was the old school type of agency that, hey, what happens here stays here. Nothing ever stays there anymore. And Winslow's a case study on that. It's an absolute case study. And if you come into an agency like that, understand that you have to be with your folks. Just like Chris said, he went in and he did that. I would go out and I'd work the road with the guys, right? And they're like, what's the chief doing? He's going out and taking calls, and actually taking reports. And they didn't really see that. I wore a uniform every day. The chief really, before he was, he didn't do that a lot. He didn't wear a uniform a lot. That meant a lot to the troops, just seeing that you could go out and work the road side by side. Again, Steve was a great guy. He was at retirement. So, when you look at it, it's, what have we done? How can we do things differently? So, with that, moving into the future, we're putting training. We signed up for IACP's One Mind Pledge. We've surpassed that. In fact, every single one of my officers is going through crisis intervention training. It's 40 hours. By the end of this month, everyone will have completed that. CISM, we have a great CISM team. We have a program called Bulletproof. Every time somebody's having an issue, they're able to call in, they're able to get that mental health resources if they need that. Never underestimate the toll that this takes on your folks. Because although it takes a toll on your community, it will take a toll on every employee, and that's what it was. If there was a Ferguson effect, it was in Winslow. If that term exists, depolicing was happening in Winslow. They did not want to actively police. You heard the officer, just that snippet. Hey, we were getting, they were spitting at us, they were cussing out of what. Imagine policing that environment for a while, right? At some point, you have to heal the community, but you have to heal the agency as well. So, focus on community interaction. We continue to do that. At this point, and I know we are right on time, is there any questions? Any comments? Yes, City Manager.
Can you go to the microphone because we can't hear you? Now we have to turn it on. Maybe we can get some AV help here. Thank you. He's taking.
Is it on? I don't.
Hello? Okay. Trevor Hewitt, retired from Metropolitan Police Department. This is something that's happened out in Maryland, but a young black man died in police custody. I've got to tell you, it was a small police department, 3 small police departments, but the county police department did something that the family really appreciated. And I was hoping we'd get a little bit more of this. But the lieutenant from the county police department that comes after the fact calls the police chaplain for the county services. I can't tell you how much the family appreciated the police chaplain coming out after just seeing their son killed at the hands of the police. And that was a very soothing and calming influence on the family. The other thing that the family liked outside of the death, they were very upset, was the fact that the county police, not the other police officers, rendered medical assistance, CPR. It seems like they took control when they got on the scene, while the other small police departments really just stood by and didn't do anything. What they didn't like was the fact that the small police departments and the town manager and town council, they didn't show up to the vigil. There was a lot of publicity gained from that, and it was negative for the town council and the town manager not to show up. Then there was a council meeting where the black community showed up to the council meeting and gave them hell in front of all the press. How did you respond to that? As far as did you go see the family? Did you reach out to the family? Did the police department reach out to the family? I'd just like to hear how you did it immediately after. I like what Chris did with the programs instituted, but that's well after the fact. So immediately after that, how did the police department or the town itself deal with the family?
In a nutshell, and very quickly, of course, as you know, every incident has its unique characteristics. And this one was no different. There was, and of course, as I mentioned to you, I was out of town when it happened. And so when I got back to town, I immediately went to the police station, got a briefing. The area was secured. We had the county sheriff, we had neighboring police departments and DPS all on the scene to secure the area. And there were members of the religious community also who had ventured out to the area to help assist in any way they could, and I can't recall the specific times, but less than 5 minutes after the shooting occurred, there was emergency medical service on the scene. Okay, so as far as my personal involvement, of course, I was still coming in, and I got a briefing. I was advised not to go into the perimeter that night, so I did not. And so at the next council meeting, we gave a brief overview of what had happened to the community, and believe you me, for the next year or more, and that's why I love this man. For the next year or more, every council meeting was packed. Every council meeting had somebody there to tell us what we had done wrong. And in large part, you had to take it because under open meeting laws, when people aren't agendized and they just come up to a meeting and start yelling at you, you can't respond as much as you would like. And so we all took an awful lot of criticism. Some of it deserved, much of it not, quite frankly. But it is hard to sit there when your people are being called murderers, when you know the facts don't bear that out. But at the same time, Chief Garnett and I were going to up to visit chapter houses. And I don't know if you know the system of Navajo government. They have chapters kind of like we have towns. And so we visited the Navajo Nation chapters that were within a 60-mile radius of the city. And at many of those meetings, we took a good bit of criticism. And at the Tisto chapter, which is the chapter that the young lady came from, her family was present for that chapter meeting. And we did take, we took a lot of criticism both from the family and from the governing body of the chapter. We did the best we could to assure them as best we could that justice would be served. And we believe that even though it took quite a bit of time for justice to be served, that it was. We do know that under any circumstances in a case like this, it's never going to be good enough. And so the transition between Chris and Dan coming in made sure that everybody in the police department was very, very acutely aware that we had repairs to make in our relationships with the Navajo Nation, and those are ongoing even today.
Okay, folks, real quick, I'm sorry, we are over time. We can certainly do this offline, but we need to clear the room and get prepared for the next one.
Happy to
Thank you so
stay
much,
if you want
everyone,
to
for
talk
showing
to
up.
us.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.